trying to destroy documents linked to human rights abuses during the rule of the ousted President Hosni Mubarak. And in the capital, Cairo, Egypt's former interior minister has pleaded not guilty to charges of money laundering and profiteering. Habib El Adli was arrested last month and is also widely blamed for being behind brutal attacks by security forces on protesters during the recent uprising. More than 50 African Union peacekeepers have been killed, it's emerged, in fighting in Somalia in the past 2 weeks. The deaths come amid a major offensive against the Islamist al-Shabaab fighters who control large parts of the country and the capital, Mogadishu. A large proportion of those killed are believed to be from Burundi. A national period of mourning has been announced in Nepal. The two-time former Prime Minister Krishna Prasad Bhattarai has died at the age of 87. He led a popular movement to restore multi-party democracy twice in the 1990s. Now here's Frost over the world.
Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World, and a programme which is, naturally, dominated by the continuing unrest in North Africa and the Middle East. We'll be hearing from a leading pro-democracy activist in Yemen, a voice that's rarely heard, and from the head of the UN Refugee Commission, who is at the heart of this crisis in the Middle East and in North Africa, trying to deal with the humanitarian crisis on Libya's borders. But we begin with the increasing calls for international intervention in Libya. One of the most powerful voices calling for this form of military action, and in particular for a no-fly zone over Libya, is that of the former US presidential candidate, John McCain. He joins me now from Washington. John, you've been speaking firmly in the last few days about the advantages of a no-fly zone option. How would that work, and, well, do you think it would work?
Well, first of all, David, you would declare it, which would have a, in my view, a very salutary effect on the Libyan pilots. As you know, there are severe questions about the morale and loyalty of people like that. 2 of them have already flown to Malta, as you know, and there is certainly some doubt as to whether they would fly for fear that sooner or later they would be shot down. Second of all, we have assets in the region. We have an aircraft carrier. We have bases in Italy and in Sicily, as you know, and we could work with our allies. The British Prime Minister and the French President have been very strong on this issue. And most importantly, everything I'm hearing out of Libya on the part of the people who are seeking freedom from Gaddafi's rule, they're asking for it. They're asking to be protected from air attacks, and that's an understandable desire.
And in terms of making that approach and responding to that, I mean, how many other countries would be involved in this situation, do you think, John?
Well, again, the British and the French have been very supportive. Others have. I'm not averse to going to NATO, but I also think that the United States could say, look, this is a situation where people are being massacred or attempted to being massacred by Gaddafi. He has clearly threatened all kinds of things that would happen rather than him leave power. And so there's a lot of ways. If you want to do these things, you can do them. If you want to wait for a Srebrenica or even a Rwanda or one of those things, you can. But I think that it's pretty clear that just a declaration to start would show a commitment on our part, and it would also, I think, improve the morale of the people who are fearing these attacks.
Would you need the blessing of the UN in some form or other, or not?
I think it's pretty clear the Russians and Chinese would probably not agree. They may, but it's most unlikely, since their foreign minister Lavrov said that sanctions were about as far as they can go. I think you could probably get a NATO agreement. What I worry about, David, is that NATO would act after there is more slaughter, which Gaddafi has promised. Now look, Gaddafi may fall tomorrow. His days are numbered. The question is how long are those days going to be, and how much murder and mayhem is he going to be able to inflict on his own citizens before he goes? I think a no-fly zone, and I'm not talking about the slippery slope of now troops on the ground, which I would oppose, but we need to do a lot more in a humanitarian way as well. We could do some covert stuff, you know, like we know how to do pretty well. But the fact is that declaration, I think, would have a significant impact, a positive impact on the morale of those who are struggling against Gaddafi's better equipped and marginally better trained armed forces that he has.
And people say different things about Gaddafi. You met him, I think, in 2009. Do you think of him as intelligent, in control of his faculties and so on, or do you see him as delusional, or a man taking the wrong track for good reasons or bad reasons? I mean, how do you sum up the man who could be your adversary?
Well, I think anybody who's able to maintain power for 42 years, you should not underestimate. Yeah, I think there's a degree of insanity. You and I are old enough to remember that Hitler was insane too, and so was Stalin, and so have some other very successful and brutal dictators throughout history. But I view him as capable, and I view him as a person who has access to huge amounts of money, and I think he's dispensing a lot of that money now to maintain the loyalty of his mercenaries and perhaps his troops. And again, his forces are not well trained and they're not well organized, but they're a lot better trained and a lot better organized than those civilians who are rising up to try to assert their freedom. That's why I worry to some degree about a possible stalemate, which would then entail significant bloodletting. But please let me be clear, I am not predicting the outcome of events, but I do agree with the President of the United States and the Secretary of the State. Gaddafi must go.
And what about the situation in terms of, people look at the situation of the rebels, brave, the rebels and so on, but sometimes underarmed. Should the West, for instance, support the rebels, if not with soldiers on the ground, but at least with weapons?
Well, I think that has to be a real serious consideration. You know, during the Afghan war, Russian war of Afghanistan and other conflicts, we have supplied arms to the right people. Obviously, there's not a degree of cohesion or organization now that would make that easy. I think we could supply them with things like satellite imagery. I think we could, but right now, I think one of the best things we could do is provide them with the moral support that